every question that anyone wants to ask about who we are, how we live, what sort of social policy should we adopt, how should we invest the state's money, all of that comes from social research. You need to know what bit of education is most important. Should we invest most in under fives? Should we invest most in primary school or in secondary school? You need the social research that tells you how people learn, when people learn, what works. All the way through, you need to know what works in terms of people's lifetime opportunities. How do you make sure that somebody can fulfill all their potential? What intervention, where in their life? By teachers, maybe by social workers if they're in problem families. We need to know the answers, and only social science can really tell you that. The public probably don't realise how much social science they consume themselves. They're reading stories in newspapers that have been made to look like newspapers, and it says researchers say that. But on the whole, people are absolutely fascinated. You know, what effect does it have if you have a father or don't have a father when you're growing up? What effect does it have if you move house lots of times because you've got very insecure housing? What harm does it do to children if they have a very bad teacher for a year or two in primary school? These things absolutely fascinate everybody. Every parent wants to know, how do I make sure my child gets the best? How do I protect my child against the worst? Well, all of that evidence comes from social science. They may not know, but when they stop and think about it, they'll say, oh yes, researchers found that out, didn't they? I've always been a social reporter, a social researcher, a journalist interested in social policy. So I've always worked very closely with social scientists, trawling through what they're doing, looking for gems that you can turn into a good story, something people really want to know, something that opens people's eyes or surprises or interests them about who we are, how we live, nature of households, changes in society, particularly at a time when you get great moral panics. You get the Daily Mail stirring up terror that children will all grow up delinquent if they haven't got fathers. Well, you have wonderful research. We've heard some today about how children develop, about whether mothers going to work is a disaster. Again, the Daily Mail used to say, latchkey kids are the end of the world, civilization is coming to an end as we know it. We've just heard some research that shows that that ain't so. That half of mothers are already in work by the time a baby is 1, and there is no noticeable difference in the research between those babies whose mothers work and those who don't. So people don't need to panic. Mothers beat themselves up every time they read those stories, and now they can know it's okay. If you've got childcare, it's fine. And these are things we all need to know in our everyday life. There was one piece of social science that had an immense impact on the last Labour government. It came from America. It was called the Perry High Scope scheme, a part of Head Start for very young children, where they'd taken very young children for 2 years, preschool, and given them intensive help at home and intensive nursery school education. These were children from a very deprived background. Because there were no nursery schools, they were able to take another group, control group, who didn't have any of the intervention, and they compared them all the way through life to 30, and I think they've now got to age 40. And they found that every dollar that was spent on those 2 early years yielded $7 in savings to the state by the time those children were 30. They didn't need mental hospital, they didn't go to prison, they didn't need social services, they didn't draw social security, they had jobs, they tended to own their own homes, they had more secure marriages. Something profound happened to those children, and that sparked off the whole of Labour's big Sure Start Children's Centre programme, huge investment in the early years. These great longitudinal cohort studies of large numbers of children born in 1948, in 1946, in 1958, in 1970, then there was a 30-year gap until when the Conservatives were in power, they didn't want to commission another one, until the Millennium Study, which Tony Blair brought in. And now, I'm glad to say, we're going to have another one. It was supposed to be 2012, it's now going to be 2015. So that we won't break the studies where you can compare what's become of children in different circumstances, born right the way through a century, and right through to the future. Of course, they need to be kept up. You need to keep going back and re-interviewing those people. So it'll be for future governments as well to invest in social science. These are studies that people come from all over the world to look at, because it's the only place where you can mine for so much information about these families growing up over many decades.